Hey there, so for the last 3 months, I've actually been using the ROG Ally here, and the number one thing that has come to mind to me while using this system is that Sony needs to make a new PlayStation Portable. And I know as a PC user, it might seem crazy to ask a console manufacturer to make a handheld, but let me explain why I think Sony doing that is the perfect move for them right now. But first, this video is brought to you by Instant Gaming. If you're looking for a great deal on the new Elden Ring DLC, Instant Gaming has you covered with their El Dorado summer sale going on right now. You can get up to 20% off this brand new DLC depending on the system that you're looking to get it on. So don't miss out on these fantastic savings. Check out the link down below and sign up for the giveaway that Instant Gaming and I are hosting right now. You could win any game in their catalog, which means you also have a chance to win that Elden Ring DLC. So check out the link down below. So to really understand why this is the perfect time for a PSP, we really need to look at what is inside the ROG Ally here and to look at what is inside its main competitor, the Steamdeck. Inside this ROG Ally is the AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme processor. That is an 8-core, 16-thread Zen 4 processor with 12 RDNA 3 cores on the GPU. That's a pretty powerhouse of a CPU. But when you really look at what it is, it's actually just an AMD 7840U that has just had the AI cores disabled on it, effectively making it just an off-the-shelf part in comparison to the Van Gogh custom APU that is in the Steamdeck. What the Steamdeck does instead is it uses Zen 2 processor cores, and it only has 4 of them, but it pairs that with 8 RDNA 2 GPU cores. And what you end up with is actually a far more interesting product than those specs would originally let on. See, I don't have a Steamdeck here in front of me, but if you look at the numbers across the internet from a bunch of different outlets, one thing is very clear, is that this ROG Ally is actually not that far off from what the Steamdeck can do, even though on paper it is a far more powerful system. And of course, the key to understanding all of that comes down to one thing. It's the fact that that custom chip was designed for this specific workload, while what we're using here is just a laptop part that is slapped into a handheld. And because of that, the Steamdeck is actually able to perform really well at far lower TDPs than this system can go down to. And that means that the battery life ends up being extremely competitive on the Steamdeck, especially when we actually account for the performance it's giving for that battery life. And what Valve did is they went to AMD and had a custom chip designed for them. Not 100%. If you actually watch High Yield, he did a great video where he goes into detail about the Van Gogh chip in the Steamdeck, and you actually find out that the first version of it was a shared design between Valve and another company. The reason this was done is because the Steamdeck was an unproven product. You don't know how many units you're realistically going to sell. As big of a company as Valve is, releasing a handheld product after you've only been known as the company that has a storefront for video games is essentially one of those things where it doesn't exactly guarantee success. But of course, once they actually released the product, it did really well. The second revision with the Steamdeck OLED actually does have a fully custom chip since it moved on to a new process. And that is the benefit that Sony would have here. Sony has had a history of working with AMD making custom APUs because that's exactly what went into the PlayStation 4, exactly what went into the PlayStation 5, and exactly what could go into a PlayStation Portable in today's market. Because of that established history of working together and because of the established brand that is PlayStation, there is no risk in that they won't be able to move units Of course, that doesn't guarantee that a new PlayStation Portable is going to just immediately become a success, but the units are far more guaranteed to move than a completely brand new product coming into a new product category. And there are some key advantages that Sony would have with coming into the market. But the big thing is, if they can leverage that relationship with AMD and create a custom chip that has enough power and enough battery life, they could take over the handheld market for high-end, high-performance games. So let's talk about some details here.
Rated E for everyone.
Dear PSP, my older brother keeps stealing my PSP. How do I get it back?
I guess he's not as dumb as he looks, huh?
No, but seriously, he's got my Mod Nation racers.
Uh-oh. Your brother now has the ability to customize cars, build tracks, and race with his friends.
Is there anything I can do?
If he's busy with your PSP, I'm sure his lady friend could use someone to talk to. You know what I'm saying? Step your game up. Marcus, PSP.
Of course, I have to have some kind of pitch here for why Sony should even bother to do this move, especially because I would imagine they have some kind of PTSD after releasing the PlayStation Portable to middling levels of success and then the PS Vita to disastrous levels of success. See, the market is so different than what it was like back then, even when the PlayStation Vita released. See, one problem that handhelds have always had is that the game library that you have on your handheld is just inherently different than what is on your main console. If you had a Game Boy, your Game Boy games weren't going to work on your Super Nintendo or your Nintendo 64 or anything like that. It had to have its own separate library of games. The same applies to the Switch and say something like the Wii U. Even though the Switch is the direct replacement to it, there is just no intercompatibility within any of the devices like that. And it was the same with the PlayStation Vita. The PlayStation Vita, even though it was around at the time of the PlayStation 3 and even the transition into the PlayStation 4, could not play the library of either of these consoles, thus meaning that there had to be an investment into making games for this new handheld. And now the risk factor increases even more. Suddenly, it's not just you invested money in making this hardware, it's you are now investing money in making the software that is going to effectively sell this hardware, which means your investment into all of this is just so much greater, and it makes this a far riskier endeavor. I understand this. That's why now's the perfect time for Sony to release a new handheld, because of the fact that the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5 are effectively just x86 computers. There's actually not that much difference between this handheld right here and what is inside the PlayStation 5. And because they're x86 systems, that means that your PlayStation 5 library, your PlayStation 4 library of games should in theory work on here. I mean, I am playing games that were on the PlayStation 4 that are on the PlayStation 5. They're running on here right now on a completely different operating system. It would not take that much effort at all for Sony to release a handheld that could play the existing library of games, thus solving that problem of having to invest a lot of money into releasing games for a platform that is completely unproven. The games are already there. You already have your existing library. You could either play it on your full PlayStation 5 console, or you could play it on your new PlayStation Portable. It is the exact same game, exact same save files. This would be huge and would be exactly the game changer that Sony would need here, because the main problem that they've always had is that they always struggled to have killer apps for their handhelds. If it wasn't for Grand Theft Auto releasing on the original PlayStation Portable, I find it hard to believe they really would have sold anywhere near as many units as they sold. Now imagine a world where the PlayStation Portable could just play the entire games library of the PlayStation 2 or even just the PlayStation 1. That would be a drastically different experience, and it might have just been all that was necessary to move millions of units. And well, the opportunity is there right now. Handhelds have evolved dramatically. x86 is actually viable on these handheld devices in a way that just was not possible even 10 years ago. And the Steam Deck has clearly proven that there is a demand for this. And if the fact that every manufacturer in the world right now is just jumping in on this doesn't show you that there is clearly a demand for this, then I don't know what else to tell you. And I think that Sony is positioned in a way that is unique to most other companies because of the fact that they also can do what Valve did, where they sell you the hardware at an extremely low price because they're going to make it all back in the software anyway. We've focused a lot on the hardware aspect of all of this because obviously that is a key component, but the winning strategy here for Valve was the fact that they have Steam. Steam is what made the Steam Deck what it is today. They were able to sell that system at such a low price because they're gonna sell you games. If you're gonna buy games, it's gonna be off of Steam. They have successfully pushed people onto Linux, a platform detached from Windows, into essentially their own little walled garden where you are buying games pretty much exclusively off of Steam. And because of this, they are providing the best handheld PC gaming experience while also undercutting the entirety of the market. And Sony can do the exact same thing. And this is an important thing to do because I think Xbox has learned more than anyone else that where your games library is really matters. People are not going to switch to the Xbox if they have had a PlayStation 3, a PlayStation 4, and a PlayStation 5 because their games library is just already there. So as all of these different platforms become more entrenched, where moving from one system to the other is effectively impossible because you don't want to lose those investments that you've made over the last decade or 2 decades, you end up kind of just staying on whatever you are right now. And a great way for Sony to keep people on their platform, to keep them entrenched and to keep them from ever even considering switching over to another platform is essentially to expand on their PlayStation ecosystem in a meaningful way. Because every company wants to grow their ecosystem and they start making a bunch of peripherals and a bunch of crap that people just don't want. While a handheld device that lets you play your already existing library of games while also having compatibility with any new titles that you get is going to pretty much guarantee that everybody just stays within your already existing platform. The software really matters. And if people can carry over their games library from their PlayStation 4 or their PlayStation 5 over to their PlayStation 6 and their PlayStation Portable 3 or 4 or whatever they decide to call it, the point is if you have that intercompatibility, if you have that ability to keep these games working on newer systems, well, again, people are going to never leave your platform because as they purchase a new game, they are more and more and more invested into there. So Sony has a very, very real opportunity to expand the PlayStation brand in a way that they haven't really been able to do outside of the home consoles. And I think more than ever, they really need to do this because my generation, we're starting to get up there in age. You know, I'm going to be turning 30 in the next 2 years. And this younger generation of kids, you know, this Gen Alpha, these kids are growing up with mobile games. Already, a huge section of this audience is from India. And India is one of the most interesting places in the world tech-wise because the vast majority of people on there are using mobile devices for pretty much everything, including gaming. And mobile gaming is so different than how it was when I was younger, when the iPhone was only a couple of years old. You can play some incredible games out there, and if you have kept your eyes on YouTube in the last couple of months, you might have noticed that there are a lot of people that are emulating Windows games on phones and playing games like Fallout on a phone. So Sony is in a awkward position where there's an entire generation of kids growing up that only know how to game on handheld devices, on smartphones. And if Sony cannot provide them the gaming experiences that fit what they're looking for, they're never going to get them. It's going to be so hard to sell them on a games console if they're just used to playing games on their phones. If you have a handheld device with a touchscreen, you are now giving these kids a device that is a lot more familiar to what they're used to. They might not even be used to using a controller. A lot of them are very used to just touchscreen controls. But since you'll have touchscreen input, you'll have gyro controls, it'll be a lot easier for them to acclimate to that, which is why the Switch has been extremely popular, because it's able to bridge that gap pretty easily. That's something that Sony and really Microsoft as well are thinking about, and they really should put a lot of energy into that. I've really been enjoying messing around with the ROG Ally, but a lot of its shortcomings become very apparent. And it's unfortunate because it's not really something that could be easily fixed. Sure, the technology exists out there to make this a better device, but as you do that, it becomes a lot more expensive. And it's really that storefront. It's being able to sell games that makes these devices viable at an affordable price. Valve is able to do it, but no one else can really do it on PC. So we're kind of stuck in a situation of, do we want a handheld from Nintendo, which will really only ever have Nintendo games on there, and very niche indie titles, and admittedly a lot of fun games coming from Japan, but still no major titles really ever hitting it? Or do we want a PlayStation Portable that will at least have AAA titles that will run on it, and will also have that benefit of a lower price tag because Sony is able to subsidize it? I'm willing to accept that. See, no matter what, being able to play Helldivers while in bed just before I'm getting ready to go to sleep is really nice. And quite frankly, as much as I like the fact that I'm able to play my entire Steam library on here, and the fact that it runs Windows means that I do have access to not just Steam, but I have access to my Epic library and my GOG library, it is nice. But if I could have a longer battery life, if I could just easily pick this up and start playing all of the games that I was playing on my console earlier that day, well, suddenly this is a far more compelling device that could realistically change how you game. That's how the ROG Ally has been. I have been playing games far more than I ever have because I'm able to just do it wherever in a far more casual way. But the problem really comes down to the fact that this thing just eats through its battery life because the chip in here is just way too power hungry. And there's no simple solution here unless Asus is willing to take a pretty major risk in getting a custom chip made from AMD. And I just don't think that they're ever really going to do that. So then we're left with just one other option, and that is for Sony or for Microsoft to join in, use their leverage as a established AMD partner to make a custom chip, use the fact that they have their own established stores with users that have an existing library of titles to essentially give value to the system from day one and provide a good price that will actually make it a viable option. I mean, there are some incredible handheld mini PCs out there, but when you look at the price tags of the vast majority of them, they suddenly start to look a lot less incredible. So let's hope that Sony actually finds it within them to give it another go at the PlayStation Portable brand and not just give us this half-assed attempt with their little streaming handheld. Give us a proper device, because more than ever, getting people just established gaming on your brand is really the key to success here, and I think Sony has an opportunity to really do a great showing here.